can you not condemn a statement calling Justice Clarence Thomas a house slave? Come on, folks. That's all this amendment does. I mean, does anybody here support that kind of rhetoric? I don't. I don't think you do. And this kind of rhetoric hasn't been directed toward John Roberts. It hasn't been directed toward Neil Gorsuch. It's been directed toward Clarence Thomas. And it's un-American, it's unconscionable, and I can't believe we wouldn't condemn it. I don't care how many lawyers can dance on the head of a pen. Don't try to pretend that this is some sort of a technical mistake in this amendment. It's not complicated. You don't have to be a senior at Caltech to figure it out. It says all of this stuff about Clarence Thomas, calling him a house slave and other racist, disgusting statements we condemn.
Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. It's your friend and fellow patriot, Freedom Forge, coming at you with another dose of truth and common sense, straight from the heartland of America. Today, we're diving into a Senate Judiciary Committee meeting that, frankly, should outrage every decent American, because it exposes the absolute double standards and hypocrisy we're seeing on the left when it comes to race, justice, and the rule of law. This is about the recent debate over Senator Kennedy's amendment, SGL 23885, for those keeping score at home, to condemn racist slurs and attacks made against Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Now, if you're a freedom-loving American, you might be thinking, well, that sounds like a no-brainer. Of course, we should condemn racism against any Supreme Court justice, especially someone like Clarence Thomas, who has served with dignity for decades. But, folks, buckle up, because what went down in that hearing room is a perfect example of why we've got to keep fighting for our values.
Mr. Chairman, I would call up Amendment SIL 23885, SIL 23885. This amendment would simply condemn the racist things that have been said about Justice Clarence Thomas.
Senator Kennedy, is it safe to say that you condemn all racist comments and attacks on all justices?
So to be clear, Senator Byrne, you're talking about simply saying that we condemn racism against any justice, but,
Yes,
he will only put one justice in?
That's right.
I don't understand the reluctance to accept the fact that Justice Clarence Thomas, who happens to be a black man, has been the butt of a lot of racist statements. And I don't understand the reluctance to condemn those. And that's what my amendment does. I don't want to water it down. I don't want to bubble wrap it. I don't want to sugarcoat it. I want it to say, big as Dallas, the United States Senate condemns all these racist things that have been said about Justice Clarence Thomas. Now, if somebody wants to offer another amendment to condemn every racist thing that has ever been said in the history of ever, I will vote for it. But this one is about Clarence Thomas. And I'll support going through justice by justice, all of whom have anybody who's ever served on the Supreme Court. But this one, and I think we all ought to go on record, is about Clarence Thomas.
Will Senator Kennedy yield for a question?
Yes, sir.
I'm reading your amendment, which I think is very well drafted. One of the things you cite is on July 13th, just a few days ago, 2023, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison disgustingly likened Justice Thomas to a house slave from the film Django Unchained. Are there any of the other 9 justices who have been subject to such racist attack in the last few days from a sitting Democrat in the state of Minnesota? who has anyone else been subject to those kind of attacks as frequently, as brazenly, and as unapologetically?
No, sir, and it would be unconscionable for this committee not to condemn that kind of rhetoric for Clarence Thomas.
Chairman, despite Senator Graham's view of the breadth of this bill and the debate, I consider this to be not relevant to the matter at hand. And further, it specifically requests the Biden administration to inject itself politically into a law enforcement decision that the Biden administration, I think quite properly, has avoided getting involved with. So I urge my colleagues to vote no.
Any further discussion on this amendment? If not,
Are you going to offer a second degree then on the?
I have some discussion.
Senator Kennedy, your amendment.
How can you not condemn a statement calling Justice Clarence Thomas a house slave? Come on, folks. That's all this amendment does. I mean, does anybody here support that kind of rhetoric? I don't. I don't think you do. And this kind of rhetoric hasn't been directed toward John Roberts. It hasn't been directed toward Neil Gorsuch. It's been directed toward Clarence Thomas. And it's un-American, it's unconscionable, and I can't believe we wouldn't condemn it. I don't care how many lawyers can dance on the head of a pin. Don't try to pretend that this is some sort of a technical mistake in this amendment. It's not complicated. You don't have to be a senior at Caltech to figure it out. It says all of this stuff about Clarence Thomas, calling him a house slave and other racist, disgusting statements, we condemn. Now, you either condemn it or you don't. And that's all this amendment does.
If I may respond, I, for one, do condemn that sort of rhetoric, but the senator's amendment does more than that. It calls upon the Biden administration to enforce Section 1507 of Title 18 United States Code to protect Supreme Court justices, including Justice Thomas, in light of flagrant violations of the law designed to intimidate justices. And we've spent a lot of time in this committee trying to make sure that the White House and the political side of the executive branch is kept out of internal Department of Justice law enforcement decisions. And in the light of that, I again ask my colleagues to vote no unless there's a second-degree amendment that clears that problem.
Mr. Chairman.
I respect my colleague, Senator Whitehouse, and he's better at me counting the number of lawyers that can dance on the head of a pin. But this is a real simple amendment. If you support the racist things that have been said about Clarence Thomas, then vote against this amendment. If you think the things that have been said about Clarence Thomas are racist to the marrow, and you condemn them, then vote for this amendment.
Someone else seek recognition. Senator Lee.
I support this amendment wholeheartedly, and I find it difficult to understand, number one, how someone could oppose an amendment whose sole purpose is to condemn racist slurs used repeatedly, publicly, and viciously against one Supreme Court justice. Now, yes, other things have been said about other justices. That's true. Other things have been said about other justices on both sides of the aisle. Justice Thomas is unique on the court in that, to my knowledge, he's the only current member of the court who's been attacked racially, even in supposedly polite society. Attacked by television news personalities, using those same racist terms. So I find it difficult to understand why anyone would object on that basis or any other.
Senator Cruz.
Mr. Chairman, two arguments have been proffered against Senator Kennedy's amendment. The first argument is, well, gosh, maybe there have been racist things said against other justices. I will point out objectively the venom and bigotry directed at Clarence Thomas is qualitatively different from any of the other 8 justices. This resolution gives multiple instances of elected Democrats currently in office launching racial epithets with complete impunity. It cites how Representative Benny Thompson of Mississippi, a Democrat member of Congress, called Justice Thomas a, quote, Uncle Tom. It cites how just a week ago, the current sitting Minnesota Attorney General, another Democrat, Keith Ellison, disgustingly likened Justice Thomas to a house slave, and a house slave from the film Django Unchained, a particularly vicious and loathsome character from that movie. If the chairman wishes to point to instances of any elected officials using racial epithets towards any of the other 8 justices, I will happily condemn them. I'm not aware of any. Might there be some lunatic on Twitter who said something? Sure, there are idiots out on Twitter. But these are not fringe characters. This is a senior Democrat in the House of Representatives who refuses to apologize. And this is the current Attorney General in the state of Minnesota. And so everyone should understand, look, I expect a party line vote on this. I expect all the Democrats to say no. But understand, everyone watching this will interpret that quite rightly to say, you agree these kinds of racial insults at Justice Thomas are perfectly acceptable.
Let's start with what Senator Kennedy was asking for. He put forward an amendment that simply says, we, the United States Senate, condemn the racist things that have been said about Justice Clarence Thomas. And let's be clear, these weren't just offhand remarks from some random trolls on Twitter. We're talking about Minnesota's Democrat Attorney General Keith Ellison comparing Justice Thomas to a house slave from the movie Django Unchained. That is absolutely vile and disgusting, and it was done publicly, unapologetically. Democrat Congressman Benny Thompson calling Justice Thomas an Uncle Tom. Georgia State Senator Emmanuel Jones using the same kind of racially charged language. These are elected officials, folks, not anonymous internet trolls, not some fringe activists. These are people who make our laws and run our states. And what do we get from the left? Crickets, silence, or worse, excuses. Now, you'd think every member of that committee, every senator, Republican or Democrat, would stand up and say, absolutely, we condemn this. But that's not what happened. Instead, you had Senator Whitehouse and others basically saying the amendment was not relevant to the matter at hand. Not relevant? Since when is racism against a Supreme Court justice not relevant to the United States Senate? This is the highest court in the land. If we can't stand up for our justices when they're under attack, what does that say about our country? Senator Kennedy said it best. If you support the racist things that have been said about Clarence Thomas, vote against this amendment. If you think those things are racist to the marrow and you condemn them, then vote for this amendment. It really is that simple. But what did the Democrats do? They hemmed and hawed, tried to water it down, and refused to specifically condemn the actual racist statements made against Justice Thomas. Senator Lee and Senator Cruz called them out on it, and rightfully so. Senator Cruz even pointed out that the venom and bigotry directed at Clarence Thomas is qualitatively different than anything said about any other justice, and he's absolutely right. And let's talk about the real reason the left hates Clarence Thomas, because he doesn't follow their script. He's a black man who dares to think for himself. He's a conservative who stands up for the Constitution and our founding principles. And for that, the left attacks him with the most vile, racist language you can imagine. But here's the dirty little secret. The left doesn't really care about racism unless it's politically convenient for them. If you're a black conservative, if you step off the Democrat plantation, suddenly it's open season. Suddenly, all the rules go out the window, and they will say the nastiest, most racist things about you. And nobody on their side will stand up and condemn it. Now, there was another part of the amendment that called on the Biden Department of Justice to enforce existing law, Section 1507, which makes it a federal crime to protest outside the home of a Supreme Court justice to intimidate them. We saw left-wing protesters outside the justices' homes after the Dobbs leak, and the DOJ did nothing. Why? Because, as Senator Cruz said, the Biden administration supports that kind of intimidation and lawlessness when it serves their political goals. The Democrats on the committee didn't want to touch that part of the amendment either. Chairman Durbin actually offered an amendment to strip out the call for the DOJ to enforce the law. Think about that. We have people in Congress who don't even want our laws enforced if it might protect a conservative justice. That should terrify every American who cares about the rule of law. In the end, the committee agreed to a compromise to broaden the amendment to include all justices, not just Clarence Thomas. Fine, whatever. But let's not kid ourselves. This was about avoiding the real issue, which is the left's systematic effort to delegitimize Justice Thomas simply because he refuses to play their game. Listen, folks, I'm going to be blunt. This is why we fight. This is why we stand up for the Constitution, for the rule of law, for decency, and for truth. Because if we don't, the left will run roughshod over anyone who dares to disagree with them, including the only black conservative justice on the Supreme Court. If you're a patriot, you've got to see through the smoke and mirrors. The left talks a big game about diversity and inclusion, but when it comes to people like Justice Thomas, they show their true colors. They use racist slurs. They tolerate bigotry from their own elected officials, and then they try to spin it as not relevant when someone calls them out. I stand with Justice Thomas. I stand with Senator Kennedy, Senator Lee, Senator Cruz, and everyone who has the courage to call out this disgusting behavior. And I urge every viewer, Democrat, Republican, Independent, to demand better from your elected officials. Racism is wrong, no matter who it's directed at. And if you can't condemn racism against Clarence Thomas, you've lost the moral authority to talk about racism ever again. If you agree, folks, hit that like button, share this video, and drop a comment below. Let me know what you think about the Senate's debate and whether you think the left is applying a double standard when it comes to Justice Thomas. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for more common sense, patriotic commentary that you won't get from the mainstream media. Stay strong, stay free, and God bless the United States of America.